The history of football is full of players who completely revolutionized how we perceive the game, or even how we see a particular position is supposed to be seen as. Take, for example, Johan Cruyff. The legendary Dutchman was one of the finest players in the game's history, but his biggest contribution to the game was when he entered football management, where he introduced a style of football that's still the foundation of everything aesthetically good about the game. Cruyff's philosophy inspired many future players and managers, and one of those was none other than Xavi Hernandez, who was treading on a similar path to that of the legendary Dutchman. Now, every time there's this discussion about the greatest midfielders of all time, people naturally put in Xavi's name. And of course, it's easy to see why. With so many trophies for club and country, you simply can't ignore Xavi's achievements. However, what we need to discuss is what exactly made Xavi one of the finest midfielders of all time. How can one player who never won the Ballon d'Or be considered among the greats? As we mentioned in one of our previous videos, this particular title doesn't necessarily define a player. Cruyff was one of the greatest of all time, but never won the World Cup. Does that make him less of a player than Michel Platini, Pelé, or Beckenbauer? The same logic needs to be applied to Xavi's case, especially because the Catalan was a unique player for his position. To begin with, Xavi wasn't the most athletic midfielder of all time. In an era where midfielders were expected to be all action and pacey, he probably wouldn't have made the cut. But then again, he was a graduate of the fabled La Masia Academy and was taught that in football, there are no limitations. And Xavi was actually very good at supplementing his lack of athleticism with his potential reading of the game. In a football game, there's so many things happening that are not completely visible, but are as crucial as a killer pass into the final third. Xavi perhaps was the greatest scanner of the field in his time. He somehow always knew which zones would be the best to receive passes. And at the same time, he would move himself in the field to prevent a dangerous pass from happening. His positioning forced midfielders into passing the wall wide or try to dribble past him before losing the ball, rather than playing an aggressive ball further upfield. And then there were the instances where Xavi would win the ball back purely due to his knowledge of where the pass was likely to go. When midfielders are playing in academies, coaches instruct them to be aware of what's around them, and especially to look over their shoulders every now and then. Xavi, though, was obsessed about his surroundings. Throughout his playing career, it was a common feature of the Spain international to look over his shoulders, whether he had the ball or not. This unique trait allowed him to beat multiple defenders by simply protecting the ball and allowing it to go past him and his opponent's momentum. In a nutshell, regardless of his lack of pace, Xavi moved the game at his own pace, and others had to respect it one way or another. With Xavi around, other midfielders naturally raised their game. I remember this one encounter against Real Madrid in a 6-2 win way back in the 2008-2009 season. After Madrid had found the back of the net the second time, Xavi decided to take matters into his own hands. He suddenly started playing quick, small passes with Yaya Toure and Andres Iniesta. This went on for a few minutes and exhausted the Madrid players. The entire scenario was more akin to a normal training session. Eventually, he picked up the ball from Yaya Toure, took one touch, looked up and played a sumptuous through ball to Thierry Henry, who put it beyond Iker Casillas. And then a few minutes later, he picked up the ball from Messi at the edge of Madrid's penalty box, managed to evade his markers with his signature shimmies, and put the Argentine through for his second goal of the night. Every great player has a signature move. For Zidane, it was the roulette. Iniesta's croquet was a thing of beauty. Ronaldo Nazario did a step-over. Cristiano Ronaldo had his step-overs. So it was natural for Xavi to have one of his own that involved taking his opponents for a spin. Defenders would close in on him and even try to grab him, but Xavi would simply move counterclockwise while ensuring the ball never left his sight. Xavi played the game at a speed which is no longer a common theme. He wasn't the fastest player around. In fact, if we had technology available for that time, we could have proved that he was the slowest player of his time. However, the Spaniard never needed that because of his other qualities. Why would you need to have speed on your side when you can predict the outcomes of events that haven't even happened? More than that, Xavi was just otherworldly when it came to cutting down opponents to size by limiting their passing options. Now, the quality of passing is something that makes or breaks a move. A lot of times, midfielders manage to pass the ball to their teammate, but very few have the ability to make sure that that pass doesn't impact a transition. And this is where Xavi was remarkable. He wouldn't just pass for the sake of it. His passes were meant to reach his teammate in such a manner that it would allow them to continue the move at the same speed or just ensure that they don't get in trouble. With Messi, Iniesta, and Xavi in their ranks, Barcelona became one of the best teams in the game's history. They won a historic treble in 2009, and Sir Alex Ferguson said that playing a team with Xavi on it is like getting on board a carousel that leaves you dizzy. And while the era of Barcelona's dominance was highlighted by Lionel Messi, the legendary Scottish tactician was a bigger fan of the other two. It wasn't really Messi who was the problem. It was Iniesta and Xavi. They can keep the ball all night long, said the former Manchester United man after losing the Championship League final in 2009. In a modern era where sports scientists have become obsessed with how different metrics define a player's ability, Xavi was a statistical anomaly. The legendary midfielder's movement was highly unpredictable, and regardless of which area of the field he was in, his passing numbers were never impacted. Players like Xavi are generational in a sense that they can never be completely replaced. Since his departure to Qatar and eventual retirement, Barcelona had moved heaven and earth to find a good replacement. Artur Melo was seen as someone who would do just that, but the Brazilian was eventually shipped out to Juventus. Thiago Alcantara was not patient enough to stay on at Camp Nou and moved to Bayern Munich, while Marco Verratti preferred staying put at PSG. Frenkie de Jong was supposed to be the eventual replacement given the fact that he was schooled at Ajax and was one of the brightest students of total football philosophy. However, things hadn't exactly worked out for the Dutchman, who might end up leaving the club this summer largely due to their financial constraints. Nonetheless, Xavi is now back at Barcelona and has a new crop of players at his disposal. With Gavi and Pedri around, he has a couple of brilliant young players who he can take under his wing and do as much as he can to help them realize their full potential and perhaps become his heir apparent. For someone as diminutive as Xavi, it was remarkable that he would hold his own against the meanest defenders on the planet. However, his speed of thought and ability to predict his opponent's next move is what made Xavi one of the finest midfielders in the history of the game. Big players are defined in big matches, and Xavi was never a spectator in the big games, both for Spain or for Barcelona. There aren't many players who actually make those around them better, but Xavi was not just any other player. He was a player who had the heart of a lion and the teaching of an institution behind him. But more important than that, he was someone who wanted to buck the trend of how midfielders were seen. And boy, did he reinvent the entire position. And while he never won the Ballon d'Or in his career, the fact that he was the driving force behind everything great Spain and Barcelona achieved just shows how different things could have been had he not been there.